Hello, and welcome to the Cultivating Confidence podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Grams. I am a life coach who specializes in anxiety, health, and human design. And I also happen to be a functional medicine pharmacist. This podcast is a compilation of conversations that I've had with clients and colleagues. So listen in as we explore the mind, body, and soul's confidence in its many forms. All right, so today we are talking about calming chaos and specifically the mental chaos, because unfortunately, I don't have a lot of tips for how to actually change your life. But changing your life really starts with your thoughts anyway. So we live in a world that most of us would agree is very busy, right? Even though that's not an actual fact, it's a generally accepted statement, right? Like we've been conditioned to believe not only that life is busy, but that it should be busy. We've got jobs and kids and hobbies, family and friends to deal with, obligations to fulfill, housework to do. I mean, the list is endless of all the things that you can come up with. And I didn't even get into, owning a business or like trying to, I don't know, whatever, manifest a new job for your, like there's just so many different things that we can fill our time with that makes it all seem overwhelming, right? But how many of you can honestly look around at what you get done every day and say that you got everything? How many of you could ever say that you got everything you wanted to get done in a day done, right? I can't think of an example myself of a day where I really actually got everything done that I thought I needed to get done, right? Most of us just look at it all and feel utterly overwhelmed by the chaos that we call our lives. And we choose to keep piling things on there. We choose not to let things go, right? And yet we choose to tell ourselves a story about how we're overwhelmed. At least I do. And I've got some good news and some bad news. And the good news is that you are capable of seeing this all in a different light, and everything will change. And the bad news is that you are capable of seeing everything in a different light and everything changes, right? It can be a really unsettling, mind melting thing to go through this shift and realize that you're, I mean, there are many times where I kind of go through this, my life is a lie moment. And most recently, it was because I found out that two characters on one of my favorite shows actually have very thick accents that I was not aware of. I thought everybody was an American on this show. And then I was like, oh my God, like I've been watching mind blown, right? Like my whole life is a lie. I've spent half the day Googling interviews so I could hear them talk in their normal voices. It was insane. Well, not the whole day, but enough to make it worth like sinking in that this is actually not not my reality of what I thought, right? But how interesting is it that they have that accent the whole time, and it was really only me thinking new thoughts about them that created this chaos in my mind, right? So let it be mind melty when you start to see things in a different light and everything changes, right? But being willing to step into the space where you want to be wrong about your interpretation, like all of a sudden with these characters, I knew that in order to not be stressed out about it in whatever way, it seems like a tiny thing, but I think it's a good metaphor for a lot of different things because it's so concrete. But like my life, I felt like dramatic, but it felt like the rug was being pulled out from underneath me, right? And it was like, oh, how can I see this differently so that I can return back to calm? And for my brain, it's seeking out information by default, right? That might not be yours. It might be talking to your network. It might be, doing any number of different things, trying different things, right? But for me, it's finding information so that like searching for interviews from these people, like so I could actually hear them talking was like what helped me settle into, okay, this was always reality. I just thought of it a different way, right? and willing to be wrong about what my personal interpretation was of my world around me, right? Willing to open up to other possibilities. And what I realized was at first, I was telling myself a pretty shitty story of my circumstances, of the like, oh, my life is a lot. Like, how dramatic is that? But how many things do we tell ourselves something similar, that we're overwhelmed, like we've committed to too many things, whatever? Like, that's something that I have gone through recently. But how am I telling the story about finding out this new information, right? They have been this way their whole lives. I just now had a new thought about it, right? But recently, I guess a more concrete example from my recent coaching experiences, observing my own brain, thinking about all the things that I have committed myself to doing over the next several months to a year or so. My brain, I noticed, was kind of taking the route of, oh, I've committed to way too many things. And then I'm like, well, no, but I thought about all of those things very intentionally and I chose to keep them, but I'm not doing enough during the day, but also I'm not taking enough time to rest and do self-care. So I'm doing too much and also not enough at the same time, right? Like, then there's the like, am I really built to be able to handle this sort of thing? Am I good enough to be putting myself out there like this? Like, maybe I don't deserve to rest until I've actually checked all the boxes on my list, right? Telling myself I don't have time for everything that I want to get done. Telling myself that I've been wasting my time, that I've been filling it up with too much things, right? So where does it end when we're in this like thought loop, right? The thought that helped me when I found out that my brain was in the spiral, when I figured it out, when I sniffed it out, found the red flag, right? If there was truth in any of it, brain wouldn't be jumping around so like crazily, right? It wouldn't be jumping around so easily. It wouldn't be jumping around at all if there was truth in any of it, right? So the common denominator here is all of these things were just thoughts that have been circulating that at one point I for sure believed, and I slip into believing them regularly. This is a pattern that I have, right? But let's take a look at each of them and what sort of emotions, what sort of fuel, because emotions fuel your actions, right? They're the gas you use. So are you using premium gas, or are you using like stuff that's been sitting in the garage forever and ever, right? I'm committed to too many things, had me feeling overwhelmed. I'm not doing good enough, right? Self-critical. I'm not good enough to be putting myself out there like this. I'm not worthy, right? Unworthiness. I don't deserve to rest until I've done everything on my list. Makes me super stressed, right? And there are other things that come along with all of these. I don't have time to do all the things on my list, makes me anxious, right? And I've wasted my time again. Disappointment, right? But which one of those emotions, which one of those fuels is actually useful for me, right? Maybe some of them are true. Even if they are true, which ones are useful? None of them, right? So why does brain do this to us? Why does it make sense that brain is doing this in our heads, right? Overwhelm is an emotion that brain uses to get you to stop what you're doing because you are growing, you are getting too big, you are putting yourself out there. It's a risk, right? And brain wants to shut that all down. And to do that, the easy button is overwhelm. Because what happens when you're feeling overwhelmed? You kind of stop doing anything. You start to buffer with either Netflix or, food or beverages or drugs or whatever it is, right? You start to shut down. So it's self-preservation by overwhelm. And it makes sense. From an anxiety perspective, brain gets, and other stressful emotions, right? Brain gets addicted to the emotions that it feels most often. Basically, there's a chemical balance. Brain gets flooded with stress hormones over and over and over and over again. And it believes that this is the set point for our environment, right? Brain starts to think that you live in a very dangerous environment, except it's just your thoughts. And brain does not know that it's not real physical threats. It's just kind of in there feeling the chemicals that are in there. It sees the stress hormones all the time, constantly. And all of a sudden it thinks that lions are constantly chasing you. So when you actually get time to calm down, when you get time to relax, brain freaks out because it's not used to this lower level of stress hormones. So it creates problems for you instead of allowing you to relax, because you clearly live in a scary world and it is not safe to be relaxing. So even just bringing awareness to this can be helpful in and of itself, right? But how do we fix it? How do we fix brain from these thought spirals and this overwhelm, right? Step one that I have found, I have 5 easy steps. They're going to change your life, right? So step one is feeling. And this is a step that we cannot skip. When you are feeling an emotion, learn to feel the emotion without resisting it so that you're not adding suffering on top of your already bad feelings, right? What if it's not a problem to feel any emotion? And why does it make sense that it's happening? And if you have not been familiarized with feeling emotions, I hear you, because most of the world doesn't really know how to feel emotions without resisting, because we're taught resist, 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 shove it down, put it away. Your emotions can't be trusted. You know, like there's just so much to that, unfortunately. But feeling emotions starts with sometimes stating what it is. So if you're feeling anxious, this is what anxiety feels like. This is what pain feels like. And I'm right now referring to emotional pain, not necessarily physical pain, although there is definitely a mental component to physical pain. But this is what guilt feels like. This is what disappointment feels like. And I get to feel it right now. This is part of my human experience, right? Sort of acceptance is almost where this one is at. Like, I am feeling these things and I should be, because I am, right? So sinking into your body, noticing what thoughts are creating the emotions, and describing the emotions that you feel, the feelings. So is it in your chest? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it stabby? Is it a buzzing sensation? Do you feel it in your hands? Does it stop in your throat? Like, does it feel like you're almost choking on it, right? Feel what physical sensations you have come up and describe it as much as you can. And then say, this is what anxiety feels like to me. And it's not a problem that I'm feeling these things, right? Step two, after you have fully processed the emotions. So, all right, let me back up a little bit. When you lean in, it's kind of shocking sometimes how fast these emotions can pass through you. And if you have been feeling a certain way all day long, it's probably because you've been resisting feeling that way. If you find yourself kind of thinking or feeling, I shouldn't be feeling this way, you know you're resisting it. If you've got that like tension added on to whatever you're feeling, that to me is a signal of resistance, right? So once you have leaned into this emotion, once you're not scared to feel the emotion, step two is doing the healing work. And this is also a step that you for sure do not want to skip. This part is letting your inner child heal, finding your worth, starting to love yourself. This is where you do the work around healing your inner child wounds. So maybe it's abandonment and you feel left out all the time. You don't want to be alone. You don't want to be left with your thoughts, right? You might threaten to leave when you're upset. Those are all indications of an abandonment inner child wound. Guilt is another one where you're constantly feeling guilty, constantly feeling bad, never asking anyone for help, really bad at setting boundaries because, you know, everybody else needs your help more than you needs your time more than you need it, right? People with guilt, inner child wounds, sometimes use guilt to try to control. Like, oh, well, you're going to feel bad if you don't do this. Yeah. How many of us have heard that, right? Trust is an inner child wound. If you're afraid of being hurt, if you don't trust yourself or you don't trust that others are telling you the truth, right? You might need a lot of reassurance or validation from other people. And neglect is the last inner child wound that I will talk about, but it's not being able to let things go. You have a low self-worth. You suppress your emotions. You're afraid of being vulnerable, right? That might be an inner child wound of neglect. So make sure that you're taking a look at them, being honest with yourself, right? But also, this is the part where you need to make sure that your toddler brain, with all these wounds on it, feels seen and heard. So you might want to say things to brain like, okay, I am here for you, right? If you can go back in your brain to when you felt that as a child, picture your inner child self at that age, right? I'm here for you. I've got our back. You are worth the trouble. And you don't have to feel bad about this. I got you and I love you. We got this, right? Whatever in there, or, come up with your own version, absolutely, to remind yourself that it's going to be okay without gaslighting yourself. Because a lot of coaching work tends to have some element of gaslighting, unfortunately. And you don't want to go into a child and say, you're not feeling this way. This is fine, right? When it doesn't feel fine. We want to go in with like, I hear that you're scared. It makes sense that you're scared. And I'm here for you. I'm here to give you a big hug. And we're going to do this. It's going to be okay. Right? So that is the quick and dirty version of step 2 of healing. Step 3, letting go of what you can. So reprioritizing. Take an honest assessment of yourself and your priorities. And be honest about what you're trying to control in your life that's not worth it. Anxiety often comes from trying to control the future, trying to predict all of the circumstances that would happen and solving for them in advance. And a certain amount of that is healthy, right? We want to make sure that we have enough clothes for the whole vacation that we're going on, as a silly example. But so, like, taking a moment to analyze and solve that problem is very helpful, right? Maybe you need to bring the sunscreen. But what are you thinking about that you cannot control? Can you solve all the problems on the news? If not, does it serve you to dwell on them, right? I am a huge advocate for being aware of what's happening in the world. And it no longer bothers me because I cannot control it. I can't control what the news outlets are telling me. I can't control that I don't get to see outwardly what good is in the world, right? And there's always going to be good in the world alongside all of the news stories. And I choose to believe that because it helps me get through my day. It helps me take action to do my part in trying to change the things on the news when I can. But also, like, coming back from the news thing and trying to control the world, what sorts of things are you trying to control or trying to do that you won't even remember a year from now? Like, is it really that important that the laundry gets folded, right? Or are you just beating yourself up about it and you're not going to actually fold it? Like, would you rather not fold it and be a huge jerk to yourself, or would you rather not fold it and then just accept that as reality, right? Like, that was not my most important thing. Maybe my most important thing was hugging my kid today. And they needed lots of hugs. Maybe it's hugging your inner child, because my inner child needs lots of hugs some days. From a different perspective, do you really need that certification Or is it just brain telling you that you're not good enough yet? Ooh, I gave up on that one and wow, it feels good. Yeah. Doing dishes, same vein. Do you really need to do those dishes? Or is it just a task that you've piled on, right? Not saying to eat off of dirty dishes, but like, is it necessary to have a squeaky clean kitchen every night? Not in my household. I'm not going to be the one to do it, right? That's something that I have let go of trying to be perfect about, right? And there's so many different examples of that. And even like folding, like washing and folding sheets, not the strong point in all of the members of my household. But and a few years ago, I definitely had a different opinion on this. So like I said, I have been most of the places that I talk about, right? I couldn't stand how things were folded. So then I had to do it, right? If I wanted it done my way, fairly enough, I had to do it because no one else really cared about that particular aspect of it. And once I let go and realized that, it's probably not the worst thing to just have a little bit crinkly sheets when you put them on the bed fresh, right? Like, who cares? Let that go. Stop chasing certifications that you don't actually need because you think you're not good enough, right? Let that go. And if you want to do it because it will expand your knowledge on a thing, absolutely, but know your reasons and like your reasons, right? What can you say no to? It's okay to change your mind and tell people, like, look, I thought I would have time to bake cookies for the bake sale, and I'm really just not up for it. I'm so sorry. Let yourself say no. Let yourself change your mind. Let it go. Step 4 I have is changing the story that you're telling about it. So everything you do is based on wanting to or not wanting to feel something. And there are very, very, very few things in the world that anyone can make you do. So own your desires and your choices, and what you decide not to let go of in step 3, own it. Pay attention to the story that you're telling around it and decide whether the story is useful. I used to fight a lot with, but it's true, I don't have enough time, but it's true, I don't, whatever. Pay attention to whether the story is useful. Is it useful for me to think this? Absolutely not, right? I was having issues with, well, the example that I used before, I was having issues with what I had chosen to consciously keep in my life. What I realized was at one point when I decided to consciously keep everything that I had on my plate and let a few things go, brain definitely thought that I could handle it. And wasn't that interesting? Because the story I'd been telling myself lately is that I couldn't. But what if the real story is that I could, right? What good does it does it do me to believe that I can't handle it? What if it's more useful to believe that I can? And also, even if I can't, even if I don't reach my goal, what's the benefit of telling myself the whole time that I couldn't? Now, if I tell myself I can and I keep going and I miss my goal, then I get to feel disappointed and I get to keep going, right? Instead of feeling disappointed and failing in advance, not even allowing myself to try, right? What's the benefit of keeping the shitty story around I can't, right? And what if you paid attention to the parts of the story that are the parts of your brain that thinks you can do it, right? How much time are you investing in that side of the story? Because again, like what's the alternative? You quit ahead of time because you felt disappointed once. Like, is that really what you want to let stop you from reaching your goals? And let's talk about the myth that we have, that we have so many of us believe in, of wasted time. Oh, I wasted so much time today doing, insert here, watching TV, scrolling on Facebook, right? If you were able to really look at what you do in a day, like if someone followed you around with a minute by minute update on what you spent your time doing, what would that tally look like at the end of the day? even, even at the end of a self-proclaimed really productive day, right? There's a lot of time in there probably that you were spent distracted or looking out the window or scrolling on Facebook or like whatever it is. And this is not meant to shame anyone out of doing anything, right? That's not how I want to live my life. But there's a lot of time in there that could be shifted. But is it useful for you to do that? Not necessarily. And what if time is never actually wasted? What's the benefit of telling yourself that time is ever wasted? Because even if it is true, is it helpful to believe that you're wasting your time? Think about that for a second. What is done and gone is done and gone, and you cannot change it. So why drag yourself into suffering by telling yourself that you wasted time? Because then in reality, what you're doing in that moment is wasting more time and more energy on what could have, should have been. Why drag yourself into that suffering? The truth is, we need rest. We don't just need sleep rest. We need like actual rest during the day, like sitting down, getting horizontal if you can, reading a book, doing whatever it takes regularly to rejuvenate yourself when you need to. Like you are always learning and thinking and processing information, whether you want to or not. And if you're constantly in action mode, you don't have time for creativity. You don't have time for flow in your life. And that's where brain does its best work, right? How many of you have had inspiration hit you while you're in the shower or while you're driving somewhere? It's because you're letting your brain rest. When you're constantly focused on the problem, especially if it's a problem, instead of focusing on the solution or just allowing your brain to wander, that's when you're not able to come up with ideas. That's when you're like forcing things. And inspiration, I mean, talk to any artist or writer. Like you can't just sit down and force yourself to be creative if you're being self-critical, if you're thinking about all these things, if the story that you're telling yourself is I have to, right? And sometimes a little bit of I have to is good for motivation, but also it's not the most powerful fuel that we have. And what if taking a nap or resting or reading a book is one of the most productive things that you can do throughout your day? Like, how is that also true? How is it true that your brain needs a rest, right? My fifth and final step, if needed, if the other ones haven't been affected, is basically just buckle up. If you have done the work, if you've done the feeling, you've done the healing, you've done, what was the third one? You've let go of what you can, you've reprioritized, and you've changed the story. You've done all that work. You're feeling good about it. And you believe that you're worthy. You love yourself. You're not using self-criticism as your fuel, right? You've made serious strides in all of the things. And your toddler brain just keeps going and going and going and going. It is the friggin' Energizer Bunny, right? This is the part where you're allowed to bust out your teacher voice and take a stand for what you actually think is right. Because what I have noticed in my own experience, again, of the like all the things that I have decided to keep on my plate, brain is telling me all these things and it's just getting louder and louder and louder. And I can argue every angle that it is coming at me for, right? I can argue the point where I have too many things. I can argue the point where I don't have enough things. All of it is coming from fear and scarcity and lack, right? Not sufficiency. And here's where I can get my teacher voice out and say, listen, sit down, we're going to do the work. I hear you. You know that what you're saying doesn't even make sense, right? And this is kind of the part where your toddler brain might just need to be buckled in into the car seat and go, right? Because we've got places to go. We don't have time for this. This is no longer helpful. You can't always pull over the car when you're trying to get somewhere to redo the work. Like, I'm not saying never try to comfort your toddler, right? Like, again, step one, feel. Step two, heal that inner child, that inner toddler voice, right? But sometimes it's necessary to just, all right, we're doing this. You're going to get in the car. I'm just going to have to listen to you scream as we drive to the place that we need to be. Because if you want to go somewhere, brain will always try to keep you safe. And what it thinks is safe is not necessarily helpful. But just notice that nothing really needs to change in your circumstances besides the letting go of what you can. It's really the stories that you're telling yourself. And what are you falling into belief about? So thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Many of you will be able to take the ideas that you've heard and apply them in your daily life. And that's really all you need. That's amazing. But for those of you who could use a little one-on-one help with how to make these things actually work for you in your real life, please reach out. The link to schedule a consult with me is in the show notes. You don't have to do this alone. See you soon.